Imagine waking up in a medieval city before sunrise. There are no supermarkets, no plumbing company, no Amazon deliveries, no power grid, no police department the way you understand it. And yet somehow, thousands of people still have to eat, work, build, trade, pray, survive, and not let the whole city collapse by sunset. That is the part people miss about medieval cities. They weren't just dirty streets and stone walls. They were living machines, and every baker, carpenter, stonemason, weaver, butcher, brewer, tanner, blacksmith and merchant was a moving part keeping that machine alive. If one part failed, people felt it immediately. No bread, no shelter, no clothes, no repairs, no trade. So today, we're going inside a medieval city to answer one simple question. How did this place actually function? A medieval city did not feel like a modern city. It was louder, smellier, darker, more crowded, and much more fragile. Most streets were narrow, muddy, and packed with animals, carts, workers, market stalls, and people shouting over each other. The city woke up through labor. Before most people were even out of bed, the baker was already working. That's why Monday's video focused on the medieval baker. Because bread wasn't just food, bread was survival. If you were poor, bread might be the main thing keeping you alive. And that meant the baker had pressure on him every single day. A bad loaf was not just bad customer service, it could mean hunger. And this is the first big thing to understand. Medieval cities worked because everyone depended on everyone else. The baker needed flour, the miller needed grain, the farmer needed tools, the blacksmith needed charcoal and iron, the carpenter needed timber, the weaver needed wool, the merchant needed roads safe enough to move goods. It was a giant chain of dependence, and if you lived inside that city, you could feel that chain everywhere. But labor alone wasn't enough, because when hundreds of people are selling food, tools, cloth, shoes, barrels, ale and repairs, someone has to decide who is allowed to do the work. That's where guilds come in. A guild was not just a club. It was closer to a union, a licensing board, a training school, and a business network all mixed together. If you wanted to become a skilled worker, you usually started young as an apprentice. You lived with a master. You learned the craft. You obeyed the rules. And you worked for years before becoming independent. Then maybe, if you were skilled enough, you became a journeyman. And after that, if you had the money, reputation, and approval, you might become a master yourself. This system controlled who got to work, what they could charge, how goods were made, and whether customers could trust what they were buying. Think of it like this. In a modern city, if a building collapses, people ask, who approved this? In a medieval city, that trust often came from reputation, guild rules, and public accountability. That connects directly to Tuesday's carpenter video. A medieval carpenter was not just a guy with tools. He was building the wooden bones of daily life. Doors, roofs, carts, houses, workshops, market stalls. One bad beam could ruin a home. One mistake could leave a family exposed to cold, rain, or fire. And Wednesday's stonemason video showed the same thing on a larger scale. The stonemasons shaped the world people looked at every day. Church walls, city gates, bridges, castles, market halls. These workers were not background characters. They were the people who turned human settlement into something permanent. Now pause for a second. Because when people imagine medieval power, they usually picture kings, crowns, thrones, armies, castles. But if you were an ordinary person walking through a city street, the king probably felt very far away. The people who shaped your daily life were often much closer. The guild master who controlled your trade, the baker who sold your bread, the priest who shaped your beliefs, the landlord who collected rent, the city officials who enforced market rules. Medieval power was not just sitting on a throne. It was baked into everyday life. A medieval city was organized by work. You could often tell where you were by what you smelled or heard. Near the bakers there was heat and smoke. Near the blacksmiths, ringing metal. Near the tanners, a smell so awful people often wanted them pushed away from the busiest areas. Near the weavers, you might hear the rhythm of hands turning raw material into something people desperately needed. That's why Thursday's video about the medieval woman weaver matters. Clothing was not disposable. There was no fast fashion, no mall, no 2-day shipping. Cloth took time, skill, labor, and patience. Turning raw wool into usable fabric was one of the most important parts of daily survival. A woman who could spin, weave, mend, or prepare cloth was not doing small work. She was helping protect people from cold, shame, and poverty. In the medieval world, clothing showed who you were, your status, your trade, your wealth, sometimes even where you belonged. So the city was not just stone and streets. It was work made visible. The baker kept bodies alive. The carpenter kept homes standing. The stonemason gave the city strength. The weaver helped clothe the community. And around them were dozens of other professions doing the same thing. Butchers, brewers, shoemakers, candle makers, porters, fishmongers, scribes, barrel makers, money changers. Every one of them solved a problem the city could not ignore. And this is where medieval cities start to feel surprisingly modern. A medieval city worked almost like a giant workplace mixed with a neighborhood, a marketplace, a church community, and a surveillance system. People knew your trade, they knew your family, they knew if your work was bad, they knew if you cheated someone, they knew if you broke the rules. That sounds harsh, but it also created trust. Because in a world without modern branding, online reviews, or consumer protection laws, reputation mattered enormously. Your name was your business, your guild was your credential, your workshop was your identity, and your survival depended on being useful. That's the emotional truth of medieval city life. You were not just living in a city, you were part of a system, and that system needed you. But it also controlled you. So next time you see a medieval city in a movie, don't just look at the castle. Look at the bread oven, the wooden beams, the half-built wall, the woman working wool by hand, the market stall, the muddy street, the worker carrying tools before sunrise. That is where the real city lived. Not in the throne room. In the hands of the people who kept everything moving. Medieval cities were not simple. They were crowded, fragile, dangerous, and deeply unequal. But they were also organized. Not by modern systems, but by work, trust, reputation, religion, guilds, and survival. And once you understand that, the Middle Ages stop feeling like a random collection of kings and battles. They start to make sense. Because behind every castle, every church, every market, and every city wall, there were ordinary people doing the work that made medieval life possible. If you want medieval history explained this way, clear, visual, and focused on what it actually felt like to live through it, subscribe. Because the more you understand the everyday world of the Middle Ages, the more the whole system finally clicks.